if you thought the original Evil Dead was brutal, then you have not seen Evil Dead 2013. That remake, reboot, whatever you want to call it, takes the brutality of Evil Dead, cranks it up to 11, and then on top of it, uses 50,000 gallons of blood just to make and hammer home that point. This is more than just another horror remake. This one goes all out there in the best of ways. Before we get started with things, I want to give a big thank you to all the supporters of Retro Horror School and of Retro Horror School Talks. It is awesome that I get to build this little slice of horror space with all of you. But before we get into the gore, the trauma, and the special effects, especially that one scene with the box cutter, you know what I'm talking about if you've seen this movie, I warmed things up a little bit with my guest and asked him a horror icebreaker about the Evil Dead. Check it out. Picture this. We are in this cabin in the woods. We're going to call it the Evil Dead cabin because Evil Dead seems to be synonymous with cabins. And you hear this creepy voice from the woods that's like whispering your name and going, "Join us." Are you going to grab a chainsaw or a boomstick and run out into the woods to try and find and destroy the demon behind the voice? Or are you going to be like, "Nope, I am so out of here. Goodbye."
So, as a horror fan, I feel like the responsible thing would be to say nope and get out of there and say goodbye. However, when I'm thinking about this, and how often do you really get the chance to be the hero in a horror movie? Like, I have a wife, I have 2 children now. I should probably say no and leave. I really should. But this may be the only chance in my life I have to go and fend off deadites with a chainsaw and a boomstick. And I think I'm going to take the chainsaw and boomstick and do this once in a lifetime opportunity. Live or die. I have to go after the deadites.
So you're going to be Ash Williams.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I feel like I'm clumsy enough to get away with pulling off an Ash Williams, so I think I'll be all right.
All right, yes. It's horror fans, we should be responsible. We know the deal, but then we also want to be the hero. But probably me, I'm a scaredy cat. I would probably be like, "Nope, I'll let you go off into the woods." Let's just put it that way. If I was with you, I'd let you go off into the woods.
I'm perfectly fine with that. You get to safety. I'm going to go out there chainsaw revved and boomstick ready to go. And if you see me, hopefully I'm not possessed when I get back.
Yeah, or I'm burning the cabin down.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, how you doing? It is I, the Terrorific Lady, otherwise known as Brandy. And welcome to this episode of Retro Horror School Talks, where I drag a guest onto my show, kicking and screaming, to gush over what else retro horror. And with me, I have... Okay, you've got like quite the interesting title here. You call yourself the patron saint of podcasting, the warden, Matt Ritter. So welcome, patron saint of podcasting. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you. Yes, I do. The warden title. So when I podcast with a bunch of my friends as co-hosts, and as I'm the lead host, normally the idea is if I'm not there and they do the show without me, the inmates are running the asylum because I'm the one that kind of keeps everything on track and on time and all of that. That's where the warden comes from. And I don't really remember how the patron saint of podcasting came along. It just sounded really cool and it stuck.
I mean, that's really cool. I like the patron saint of podcasting, Brandy, the Terrorific Lady. I mean, it's a mouthful, but if you put patron saint in front of anything, it sounds nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Tell everybody out there more just about what you do as the patron saint of podcasting besides keeping people in line.
For all of our horror fans who are here, we have a horror podcast called Getting Offed. And we do a variety of things over on Getting Offed. We have panel episodes. We have trivia that we do once a quarter. We do horror franchise reviews. We do every other episode. We go live every other Sunday so bi-weekly. And every other episode is what we like to call the Katie Horror Showcase. So my co-host Katie, she will collect news, rumors, and trailers, and will react to the latest news and rumors. And then at the end of the show, we have a segment called Shit Matt Made Katie Watch, where I pick a horror movie that she has never seen, and I have her sit down and watch it, and then we get together and talk about how she feels about it. And a lot of it is because she's younger and she's kind of newer to some of like the 80s classic stuff and maybe some obscure 2000 stuff. Like it'll be like Night of the Demons 2. She hadn't seen any of the Children of the Corn, so I picked a couple Children of the Corn movies for her to watch. Pet Sematary, stuff like that she hadn't seen. But I was like, I feel like as a horror fan, these are things that if you haven't seen, we need to expose you to. So we do that every other episode. And we also dropped on April 6th, started doing interviews with our friends as horror podcasters. The first one is actually Katie and I interviewing each other. And then we are going to tag team interview other podcasters that are our friends who love horror about their love of horror and things of that. And we call that the Gory Hole. So that is going to go up. First episode dropped April 6th. So that is available to check out.
Got a lot of stuff going on over there. Now I have to ask you about the movies that you've watched. What's the creepiest one that you've watched so far?
It all depends. Me personally, or for the show?
For your show.
For the show.
Yes.
For creepiest one that we've watched for Shit Matt Made Katie Watch was, I'd probably say Night of the Demons 2. That or Sleepaway Camp, because she had never seen Sleepaway Camp.
Oh, Sleepaway Camp.
And she doesn't go in for spoilers, so the ending was a complete and total like shock to her. She had no idea it was coming, which is always great.
I love watching people who haven't seen a movie that I've seen. I'm always looking over to them to get their reactions and to see what they're doing.
She actually really likes Devon Sawa, but she had never seen Idle Hands. So the latest episode we did was Idle Hands, which was really cool.
Oh, I haven't seen that movie either. So I'm kind of
never seen Idle Hands?
I've never seen Idle Hands. No, that kind of slipped past my radar. I know it came out like in the late 90s.
If you enjoy horror comedy,
I do.
It is definitely late 90s, but it is a very fun and entertaining movie.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be going. It's on my list. Like I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and just like I've heard a lot of people talk about the movie that we are going to be discussing. I haven't heard a bad thing from anybody about this movie yet. It is The Evil Dead 2013. Some call it a reboot, some call it a remake, but for the purposes of this show today, we're just going to call it a remake of Sam Raimi's 1981 cult horror classic, The Evil Dead. This movie, the 2013 version, was directed by Fidel Veras, and it was also produced by Raimi, Rob Tappert, and Bruce Campbell. It has fabulous practical effects, which are what the Evil Dead movies are known for. And it kind of abandons the whole slapstick humor that you see in especially the Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. And it goes for more of the really creepy overall vibe, more like the first Evil Dead has.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into more just of how creepy that movie is. This movie is as we go on. But what I have to ask is, when was the first time you saw that movie?
So it's funny. You mentioned that my birthday recently just happened, and Evil Dead actually dropped 12 years ago on my birthday. So I went to the theaters on my birthday for my first initial viewing, and I loved the movie so much, I went back the very next night and watched it a second time with a different group of friends.
Oh, wow. That good, huh?
Yeah. And I wasn't expecting it to be that good. We'll talk. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the original Evil Dead franchise, but it being a remake, and especially in 2013, and some of the remakes that were coming out around then, I didn't go in despite the trailer with a lot of high hopes. So I was very kind of cautious about what I was going to see. So I think the opening scene in this movie really kicks you in the face. I stood up and cheered once the title screen rolled, like standing ovation, clapping. It's my favorite opening in any horror movie I've ever seen. I think it is absolutely fantastic, and it hooked me right away. And I use that a lot when I talk to friends who are kind of horror curious. I'm like, listen, I'm gonna have you watch this and let me know if this hooks you because this hooked me. And I can kind of gauge what kind of horror they'd be into, judging by their reaction from the opening scene in this movie. If they're like, "Okay, that was a little too much," I'm like, "All right, so we'll ease back off from like hardcore horror. Maybe look at a little more horror comedy, something a little less, graphic." But if they're like, "Yes," I'm like, "All right, finish this movie, and then we'll really get into some cool stuff."
Yeah, Evil Dead 2013 is pretty hardcore for
Mm-hmm.
for sure. You mentioned being a little bit cautious about this movie before you went to see it and before you went into it. So I'm assuming from that you've seen all the previous Evil Dead movies before going to this one.
I
Is that
have.
okay?
I got into Evil Dead later than I got into a lot of the other horror franchises. Nightmare on Elm Street, your Friday the 13th, your Hellraisers, things like that.
Yeah.
Halloween and A Nightmare on Elm Street were like the first two I was really introduced to at a very young age from my mom. Child's Play, same thing. Evil Dead was something that I had heard about, and really didn't get into until my late teens. And I was at a place in my life where, especially as you mentioned, Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, and Army of Darkness, that campy slapstick comedy didn't connect with me the way it did everyone else that I heard talk about it. So while I love the character of Ash Williams from those movies and the Necronomicon and the ideas, the movies themselves didn't really connect to me, which is why I'm like, okay, this is a remake. And while the trailer looks really cool, because it's a remake of these movies, I'm kind of cautiously going into this because I know what Evil Dead is. And I don't know if I'm going to love it. Now, this was, as you said, a very big departure from the campy.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've said for a long time now, it has been probably my favorite horror movie. I was saying the last decade. Now it's over a decade. Now we're 12 years later.
Yeah.
So my favorite horror movie of the last 12 years, and it still holds up to this day. I absolutely love this movie. I rewatch it at least once a year, every year on my birthday as like a ceremony because that's when it came out.
That's a nice little birthday tradition. Watch yourself a horror movie. Oh, speaking of remakes, this movie did come out in 2013, and by then we had quite a few remakes of classic horror movies. There was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, which came out in 2003. We had the Friday the 13th attempt, like of a reboot remake, which came out in 2009. Then we had the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot remake, which came out in 2010. Where do you think Evil Dead 2013 sits among those remakes? So in particular, do you think that it did a better job at remaking the movie than those others that I mentioned? Like, where do you think it sits among?
So you're going to get a lot of controversial takes from me tonight.
Go for it.
It all depends on the remake. I think that what they did with Evil Dead is better than what we tried to do with the Nightmare on Elm Street, because the big issue that everyone had with the Nightmare on Elm Street was it's not Robert Englund, right? Even if Jackie Earle Haley did do his best, and I think did a pretty good job, Freddy is Robert Englund. Freddy will always be, for the most part, Robert Englund, and it's not going to hit. So what Evil Dead did was, and Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell specifically did this on purpose. They did not want people comparing the heroes in this movie to Ash and the other movies, which is why there is no Ash Williams in this movie, why it is a completely different setup and a completely different story going through this movie, because they didn't want everyone to go into this movie and ignore the movie that was made to compare it to the original Evil Dead. So that, I feel like, as you said, you haven't heard a lot of negatives about it. I did when it came out because everyone was expecting Evil Dead.
Oh, okay.
I feel like this is one of those movies that over the years has gotten better for people than it did when it first came out, because Evil Dead fans wanted Evil Dead. They wanted slapstick, they wanted Ash, they wanted all of that, and they didn't get any of that. There was some negativity when it first came out. Now, years later, I feel like it's much better receptive, and I see a lot more positive takes on it. I felt like I was one of the only fans of this Evil Dead movie for a long time, which I was okay with. I actually have the cabin and the face here of Mia from Evil Dead tattooed on my arm, and then the Evil Dead. Yeah, so that's how much I love that movie. So yeah, there's the cabin in the woods. But then you get something like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I think did better than the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because I prefer my Leatherface to be terrifying and imposing and not as much of a tool for the family. I feel like what they did in the remake was they made him more of his own imposing, serious, scary slasher. Whereas in the original, he's squealing like a pig and he's beaten like a
Yeah.
dog and he's taking orders. And yes, he's wearing a face, but that's not really scary to me. Like, the people controlling him are more scary than he is. In the remake, he's very scary. And then you mentioned Friday the 13th. I actually thought it was cool how they explained how Jason knew where to go in the camp and get around the camp and how he moved through the camp to pop up places. I know a lot of people hated that. They liked the supernatural aspect of, like, he could just appear anywhere because he's Jason Voorhees. But, like, I love lore and I love all the little extra things that are in there. So, like, explaining little things, I love that. It's really cool to me. So when I was watching it, I'm like, okay, this is cool. Like, there are bells and he knows where people are based on the bells, and he's using underground tunnels to get up. And, like, this is really awesome. I enjoyed that. So it depends on the remake, but I said it, like, this is my favorite horror movie of the last 12 years. So when it comes to remakes, this is the top of the list for me. And then I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is very close right behind it.
I didn't hear a lot of controversial opinions in there, to be perfectly honest. I align a lot with what you said. I didn't care much for the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, but for an entirely different reason. I just felt it was almost like a shot-for-shot remake in a sense of the original one, and that's not what I look for in remakes. I look for things like Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw and Friday the 13th. It's like you pay homage to the original while doing different things. That's what I look for in my remakes.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that. We're going to get along really well then today.
Awesome. And hey, like, even if we disagree, like, that's perfectly fine too.
It is,
like,
yes,
I've come up among many a disagreement with many a horror fan on certain things. One of them in particular being 28 Days Later is not a zombie movie, but I'm not gonna get into that. I get yelled at a lot by some people. But anyway, so you gotta love Evil Dead 2013 because you have a lot of that movie stuff tattooed on your arm. If you hated the movie, then you wouldn't get it tattooed on you. And Mia, we gotta talk about Mia. I loved Mia as a character. For those who, a bit of a spoiler for those who don't know, she starts off as a struggling drug addict, turns into a deadite, and then ends up as a final girl, which I thought was really interesting because usually when you see a deadite, then they're a deadite and that's it. They don't go beyond that. How do you think that journey from her being an addict to being a deadite, then to being the final girl, how do you think that reflects certain themes of, say, trauma and survival? Because those are two themes that I noticed that were pretty prevalent in this movie.
So one of the horror buzzwords within the last few years has been, elevated horror. We act as if elevated horror is this new thing, this new subgenre that's come up with A24, but we see here in Evil Dead 2013, and you see throughout horror, that themes like this, topics like this, have always been used or have always used horror as a platform to discuss some things that are a little harder to talk about, like addiction, like, survival. Because it's not just that she was an addict. She was an addict who lost her mom and relapsed and then survived that, and then now is trying to go cold turkey again. And the entire movie is essentially a metaphor for that addiction and loss and everything that's already happened in her life coming back on her, which is very, very powerful. And one of the reasons why I love this movie so much. And Jane Levy does an amazing job in this movie with all of that. She is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. And you mentioned about addiction. Yeah, it also plays a huge role in this movie. And I remember whenever she was walking around outside, she sees that demon and then ends up getting entwined in like all these vines. And then she's in the house and she tells her brother, I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. You got to get me out of here. He's just like, oh, it's withdrawal. It's just it's just hallucinations. You're just seeing things because you're going through a drug withdrawal. But no, she's actually seeing these things and she's freaking terrified and it's horrific. Do you see the horror that she goes through as a metaphor for fighting her own personal demons? Or do you take it literally as just like, oh, she's just possessed and it's an evil demon that's possessing her and that's it?
That's really interesting because I view this kind of the same way I view a lot of movies with themes like that, where I see the themes and I understand them and I know what they're doing. For example, you talked about how her brother reacts and everything, and we see, as you said, a metaphor for basically how her addiction affects her friends and family and everyone around her, right? Like, that's the metaphor with the Deadites and everything that's going on, is like her addiction and how it's affecting her brother and how it's affecting her friends and all of that. But as I'm watching it and I'm aware of it, I'm watching it straight up as a horror movie for the possession and what is going on. Like, it's in the back of my head. It's something I'm aware of, but it's not actively affecting my viewing as I'm watching it.
Oh, okay. So you feel it's more subtle and takes, I don't want to say backseat, but you just said that you know it's there, the theme is there, but it's not in your face.
Right. So I kind of separate the two. I know what's going on. I'm aware of what's going on. And I love that they do it and how they portray it. And I think it is absolutely great and fantastic. But for me to sit down and enjoy the movie instead of wallowing in a lot of that negativity and things like that, I watch it strictly as this is a horror movie about possession, so on and so forth, and enjoy it for the absolutely ridiculous effects and kills and all of the insanely fun stuff that goes on.
Speaking of the special effects, the practical effects, oh boy, did Alvarez go all in on that. So we had things like tongue splitting, which I had to look away from the screen. Oh my God, there's the thing with the nail gun. It's like, oh my God. And then there was one where Jane Levy
gets covered.
It gets her, has to pull her hand off, basically. It's like, oh my God, yuck. But so so I have to give it to him. I hardly saw any CGI effects. Even the blood was realistic. Do you think that CGI would have killed the vibe of this movie?
Yeah, probably a little bit. I've always been big on practical effects versus CGI. Obviously, there are places where CGI works and it works great for what they're trying to do. But for this, and it's a lot, right? Like, it's needles in the eye, it's boiling skin. You mentioned her losing her hand in the end fight, but also like the turkey carver and her brother's girlfriend cutting her arm off because it's infected. A lot of the nail guns and all of that, like, it works so much better as a practical effect. And I think at the time, especially with the end fight, which I know we'll talk about later, they said that this movie used the most fake blood any movie has ever used. I don't know if that still holds true, but at the time, this was the most fake blood ever used in a movie.
I don't know if that record still holds either, but now we're going to pause and look that up to see if that is still the case. Because now I got to see which horror movie uses the most fake blood. Okay, well, there is a horror movie that I don't think it's wide release yet, but it's called Iron Lung. It's that horror movie made by Markiplier. And it's based on the video game of the same name. It used, looks like 70,000 gallons of blood, and the record holder was Evil Dead 2013. Like I said, for a very long time, it used, looks like it says 50,000 gallons. I hope those numbers
which is insane.
I'm trying to think of just like 50,000 gallons of milk filled up with just like fake blood and like going from end to end. It's like, yeah, that's a lot of blood.
A lot of blood.
Yeah. But it would be like so much fun to be in a scene that just had a lot of fake blood, like in a horror movie, and just getting like just drenched in it.
Yeah.
I don't know what it says about me, but I think it would be a good time.
Absolutely baptized in blood.
Yes. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, I baptize you in all the blood. No, I mentioned previously that I also really appreciate the tone of this movie. I don't think that adopting a full-out slapstick approach would have worked for this movie. I appreciated the very brutal tone, even though sometimes I caught myself going and laughing sometimes at the things the Deadites say. This movie took a more brutal tone. Do you think that was the right call to just completely abandon the slapstick altogether?
I mean, it is my favorite horror movie of the last 12 years, so I'm going to say yes. But also, we've seen how in Evil Dead Rise, where they added a little bit more humor with the homages and the delivery and stuff, that it still worked, and it still worked effectively while keeping kind of the same tone. And then also, even though I said what I said about Dead by Dawn and Army of Darkness, I loved Ash versus Evil Dead. The show on Starz was absolutely fantastic, and I loved it. And I loved it because I feel like they took what we did in Army of Darkness and Evil Dead 2 and mixed it with a lot of the very graphic, serious stuff that we had here in this movie, and the two meshed so well together. So there is a way to do it and make it right, where you can still have Ash be Ash and have fun, but still have this graphic, brutal violence and some serious tones that we have in this movie, and bring them together in a way that works so well. And Ash versus the Evil Dead is a great example of that. And again, Evil Dead Rise, adding just a little bit more humor into it than this movie had, also shows that you can do it. But yeah, no, going full on slapstick, going full on Army of Darkness would not have worked for this movie.
No, and I think slapstick works a little bit better when you have the character of Ash Williams. Like, I like Army of Darkness, and Evil Dead 2 has been one of my favorite movies for a really long time. So, like you said, yeah, it can work, but I feel with the themes behind this movie in particular, just dealing with addiction and withdrawal, that probably that kind of tone may not have been appropriate for this kind of movie.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've mentioned the blood scene several times now without talking about it. Now we're going to talk about it. That final battle, Mia versus the Abomination. One-handed Mia with her chainsaw, so the chainsaw is making an appearance, and there's just something about that scene. It was brutal. It was nasty. It was beautiful. Like, some people might think, like, where can you find beauty in a horror movie? Like, that scene was just shot so beautifully, and I felt it was so powerful. What do you think makes this scene just so powerful and pack a punch?
I give all the credit to Jane Levy. Like, her acting from, like you said, and also you're waiting the entire movie, right, for the homages to Evil Dead. We've seen the chainsaw, we know it's there, but what's going to happen? Did you think that the brother was going to be kind of the Ash Williams character, the hero, going into the end of this movie?
It gave that impression because it centered David as almost the main protagonist throughout the entire movie until he wasn't.
Yeah. So you see that and you're expecting that, and then when it subverts all of your expectations, Mia, again, spoilers, is resuscitated, comes back to life, and then is left alone after being revived to deal with the Abomination. The sky starts raining blood. This is where the 50,000 gallons of blood really, really comes into play here. This version of herself that is elongated and gangly and creepy crawls from a pool of blood in the ground and comes after her. The terror that Jane Levy as Mia had on her face as she's trying to escape, as she's trying to get the chainsaw going, when she's in the wall and the machete is coming through the wall, just she made this entire scene in this movie, from that to her finally getting the chainsaw going and shoving her bloody stump into it and revving it up and going full badass and just carving the Abomination in half. Like, it's amazing. It is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, her facial expressions just sell it because it didn't feel too overacted or over the top. It felt just like genuine, real terror. Really did.
It did. She did great.
Yeah, she just can't say enough good things just like about it, and especially her. I believed her. Her acting like throughout that entire fight. I believed her going through the symptoms of withdrawal, and I also believed her whenever she was possessed by a deadite, because there's two totally just like different tones going on. You got Mia just very scared and confused and not know what's going on, that she's a badass at the end of the film, and then you have her just as this demonic deadites are creepy as shit. I'm just gonna put it that they're creepy as shit. The idea of being possessed and losing control is terrifying. What are your thoughts on that kind of horror, possession horror? What do you think makes it hit so hard and make it so creepy?
You hit on it a lot. It's a loss of control, right? Like, you're still there, you're aware of what's going on, but you can't stop it, you can't do anything about it. You're basically a passenger in a car that's driving off a cliff, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And that in and of itself is terrifying, because especially in this movie, they're hurting your loved ones, they're hurting your family, all of this stuff, and they don't know until a certain point that it's not you doing these things, you know? Yeah. Eventually we get there and they figure it out, but they assume it's you. And that in and of itself, something taking you over and destroying your relationships and hurting the people that you care about, and you not being able to do anything about it, and also them thinking that it's you doing it to them, is just absolutely terrifying. And then I grew up with a religious background, so possession and exorcism films and everything have always interested me because of having some of that background growing up. I think it's really cool. I think it's really interesting, and the whole idea of not having control of your body or what your body's doing and just having to sit back and witness it is absolutely terrifying.
And you mentioned having a religious background. I do also have a bit of a religious background as well, and I had to look up more of if there's any kind of religious symbolism behind blood rain, which is because just like, okay, just is there any? And there is. Medieval texts sometimes portray blood rain as this cautionary tale from God, or like this warning from God, or oh, the Black Death's gonna be coming to get you. Now I didn't like really think that there was like any religious symbolism as far as that goes in Evil Dead. I just like, oh, cool, blood rain, this is awesome. So,
but now that you bring that up, and you talked about how it's kind of like a warning, right? Even when it starts raining blood, you hear almost what sounds like kind of a tornado siren in the audio as shit starts hitting the fan in the movie. Like, there's a loud siren blaring as the sky turns red and everything. And to me, I always think tornado siren, like that warning before the shit's about to hit the fan, everything's about to go down. That just loud, just letting you know, like, shit is about to happen.
I wasn't even paying attention to that because I was just so laser focused and locked on just that abomination coming up out of the ground and all that blood rain coming down that wasn't even paying any attention to that. I'll have to see if I can hear that the second time around. I love rewatching movies and picking up on things that I missed.
Oh yeah. And again, I said, I love the lore. I love the things. So going through and all the little things that you missed that are in the background, or, you know, homages to the films that you didn't catch the first time around, makes every viewing better and interesting all over again.
And one of the biggest homages and the thing that you see in every freaking Evil Dead movie is the Book of the Dead. It's just like, I get everybody wants to read from that book, even if it's covered in a garbage bag and tied up in barbed wire. I want to leave it alone. You know, no, that's just me. I see something that's wrapped in barbed wire, I'm telling them to put it back. But man, it is cursed. It is evil, and I don't know. There's just something about cursed objects in horror films. What are your feelings about cursed objects in horror films, especially this Book of the Dead, or just cursed objects in general? What makes them work so well?
Well, it's because, I mean, not so much in the case of, I love the Necronomicon. I think it is one of the coolest things in horror. And I want to talk about more of that a little bit later. But this is something that you see and you know it's cursed. Like, you know this is not something you should open and mess with. I mean, he literally found it wrapped in a garbage bag in barbed wire and had to cut the barbed wire and peel it back. And then there's human skin bound on it. And like, this is something, but in general, a cursed object could be anything. It could be a hair clip that you pick up. It could be a doll that you buy from a thrift store. It could literally be anything. And you bring that home with the best intentions for it and have no idea that you've just brought something very evil into your home and is going to turn it upside down. And I think that is what's so cool about cursed objects, is it could literally be anything. And you have no idea what that cursed object is going to unleash upon the person by just buying it or interacting with it or bringing it home. Some of them, again, very clearly should not mess with, should not touch. And there are people out there who, they look at that as a challenge. That, hey, it's bound in human flesh and it says absolutely do not read, do not translate. Let me shade out and see what these letters that they crossed out were and read them out loud and see what happens.
I was so mad because I knew what was going to happen, but it's just like, okay, I will read the absolutely forbidden words and cause all this mayhem and destruction.
Yep.
Another cursed object I don't think you should mess with is the lament configuration.
Oh, absolutely not.
No, don't be solving no puzzles. I think you mentioned just about a challenge. Like, people take it as a challenge. I just think that cursed objects like that, like the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, it plays off of our inherent need to want to know things and our curiosity. And that's a good thing. But in horror movies, it can also be our fatal flaw.
Well, we've seen with the internet how access to too much knowledge or poorly vetted knowledge can lead to very terrible things in the world.
Yeah.
Like, just because it is there and it is accessible does not necessarily mean that it's something that needs to be sought out and absorbed. We've learned that with the internet, and we see that in all of these horror movies. I talk about how horror movies have warned us against AI forever.
Yeah,
and we still are actively running directly towards AI and making these things happen. And it's the same thing with the Book of the Dead and, this thirst for knowledge. We need to know more. We want to know as much as we can. We want to learn all of this stuff, and we run headlong into danger, not worrying about it at all until everything falls apart.
Until it's too late, we're going, oh my God, why did I mess with this thing that I knew I shouldn't have messed with?
Yep.
Now, I'm thinking about Evil Dead, and you could consider it a supernatural, like pure up supernatural, like demonic possession horror film, or you could consider it more of a film of survival. Do you see it as more of one than the other, or do you think it's a good mixture of both?
When I think about Evil Dead, I think supernatural. Again, the possession, the Book of the Dead, the Deadites, the Abomination, all of that, I think supernatural. But I think slashers in and of themselves are essentially survival films. I mean, you look at the original Halloween, and Laurie Strode is trying to survive. Everyone is trying to survive Camp Crystal Lake in every Friday the 13th. Like, slashers in and of themselves are essentially survival films. So definitely both. But if I were to go to my physical media cabinet over there and decide that I want to categorize things by subgenre, I'm going to put it in supernatural versus survival.
Okay. Fair. I probably lean maybe more towards like it being about 50-50. Now, but it would be like in the middle of my shelf of movies.
I can see that.
Probably. And speaking of survival, just like Mia does a lot of survival. She ends up being just a pretty kick-ass final girl. Where do you feel that she ranks as far as, I don't want to say every final girl in horror, but as far as the final girls that are probably the most well known, like Laurie Strode, I know is one. Some people count Jess from Black Christmas as a final girl. Sally from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And there's a lot more, and probably some that I'm missing as far as like well-known final girls. So where do you feel that Mia, I guess, ranks in terms of being a final girl?
Mia's definitely a modern final girl. So you mentioned Lori, you mentioned Jess, you mentioned Sally, and they were very much survivors. Like they were surviving these terrors. They were not Lori to an extent, a little bit, yes, but mostly was just trying to survive the night versus running headlong in to stop the thing that was stalking her. Eventually, as we move down the road, we find that badass in Laurie Strode as we get into like your Halloween H2Os, and then eventually when she's a grandmother and she's actively ready to take on Michael. But early on, very much just full on survival mode. I actually friends podcasters that I've worked with, Final Girls podcast, they do a show where they talk specifically about Final Girls, and at the end of the show, they have what they call the blood spatter badassery rating, where they rate the girls based on how covered in blood they are or their overall final girl arc, right? And Mia, absolutely soaked in blood from head to toe, covered. And then going out there, like we said, like took the Abomination on with one hand that she shoved her bloody stump into with the chainsaw, and just absolute badass, like top tier when it comes to final girls going out there. I hope we get to see her come back eventually. I don't know how we would make it happen. I would love to see her come back somewhere down the line. And Evil Dead Rise has kind of maybe opened up that possibility or set some things up with some of the stuff they did, but I'd love to see her come back.
Yeah. There's going to be another Evil Dead movie coming out. I think it's called Evil Dead Burn. I think that's the right name, like, for it. But I have no idea what they're going to be doing with that, to be honest. I'm very curious.
Have you seen Evil Dead Rise?
I have. Yes, I own it.
Okay, so they talk about in Evil Dead Rise, again, spoilers, and Evil Dead Rise is definitely newer, so there were 3 versions of the Necronomicon, and in Evil Dead Rise, we only saw one of them, which leaves 2 other versions of the Necronomicon with possible, and we haven't even really established, like we did in Evil Dead, the original, whether this is the Kandarian demon or this is just some other demon that was summoned from this book. So there are options of places we can go and things we can bring in with these books and what they do and specifically what demons they are attached to. But yeah, no, so I'm very curious. And yes, Evil Dead Burn is coming in 2026.
Oh, wow. Sooner than I thought. Okay, well, considering Evil Dead Rise came out in 2023, so 3-year buffer in between like those. Okay, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, like Evil Dead Rise, is, like you mentioned, it's the most modern of the Evil Dead movies. Do you feel that Evil Dead 2013 influenced Evil Dead Rise in any way, shape, or form, or do you feel that Evil Dead Rise was more of its own thing?
Oh no, I absolutely feel like what Fede Alvarez did influenced this movie. I feel the tone of this movie, Evil Dead Rise, is very similar to Evil Dead 2013 in how they went about it. And we talked about themes, right? In Evil Dead Rise, there's a theme of unwanted pregnancy and things like that. So again, we're tackling these tough subjects, some things that are kind of difficult to talk about for some people in a horror setting, and we're watching Beth deal with that and everything that's how it's affecting her. So very much similar. What Evil Dead Rise did, though, was a lot more homages to the original Evil Dead franchise, which I also really appreciated and loved and thought was really cool how they went about that, like the Dead by Dawn lines and just different things that they dropped throughout there to be like, hey, by the way, we didn't forget. But yeah, no, definitely Evil Dead Rise felt like a successor to 2013's Evil Dead more so than attached to the original trilogy.
Looking at those two movies, just especially back to back, yeah, I could. Lots of blood. They used a lot of blood in that movie too.
And a lot of gross out scenes, and
yes,
even the way the Deadites looked in both movies, and the way that so in Evil Dead 2013, the way that the possession transfers from person to person is always some sort of physical contact, whether it is puking black ooze onto somebody or biting somebody or mixing fluids in some way, shape, or form, blood, whatever.
Yes.
So it's always a physical, and we see the same thing in Evil Dead Rise. People start getting possessed and how they get possessed, whether you're stabbed with an instrument that has Deadite blood on it, and now that blood is mixed with your blood, so on and so forth, which is a really cool way to do the transference. It's not just like this demon is randomly body hopping. You have to physically come in contact with the bodily fluids to get possessed. They actually have to come after you and get to you.
Yeah, to me, that kind of possession makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
Instead of just like body hopping always sounded kind of funny and ridiculous. Like to me, it's I don't know. I've always thought it was as a more comical kind of thing.
Oh, it absolutely is, because we mentioned Ash vs. Evil Dead, and that's more of a body hopping thing. And then you have the camera zooming through the woods before it pops into someone's body, and they pop up, and it's definitely a comedy effect. It's very effective, and it's very fun the way they do it in Ash vs. Evil Dead, but definitely more comedy versus this is just like, you can't escape it. Once they've got you and they've got their hooks in you, you're screwed.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. Let's not ever read from the Necronomicon, then we don't have to worry about being possessed by Deadites. So don't you be reading from that book. We talked a lot just about the gross outs and the Evil Dead movies, especially Evil Dead 2013. And I've seen slashers and just horror in general that has come out after that it feels like it's almost a return to the early 2000s era of horror, where you're seeing visceral gore and mutilations, etc., the kind of things that you would come to expect in those kind of movies. Do you feel that Evil Dead 2013 in particular set the tone and raised the bar for future, I guess, gory horror that's come after that? To where, like, maybe they movies feel like, oh, let's see how far we can go. Let's see how far we can push the boundaries.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, you just mentioned Iron Lung, which is now surpassed by 20,000 gallons, which is absolutely insane.
70,000 gallons.
Yeah. But so I talked to you about my co-host Katie, and one of the movies that she has never seen that I have tried, that I'm working on getting her to watch, is Hostel. And one of the reasons she hasn't seen Hostel is because it's considered torture porn, and she's heard how graphic it is, and she's worried about it. But she's seen Evil Dead. We've watched this, and that's what I was trying to explain to her. Is for the time that Hostel came out, it was very graphic and very violent. But compared to what we're watching now with a lot of stuff, especially Evil Dead, like, it is not that bad anymore. Like, it's Evil Dead raised the bar. Like, Hostel is almost kind of tame in comparison, or at least right about the same level. So I'm like, you don't really have anything to worry about. You're not going to be so grossed out because you watched this and enjoyed this. If you enjoyed this, you'll be fine here. And that was when I was talking about that opening scene for this movie and how I gauge things. Is this going to be too much for you, or isn't it? If you're like, oh, fuck yeah, let's watch this movie, then I know, okay, these other movies will be absolutely fine. You won't have a problem with them. But if you're like, oh, no, I can't do this. This is disgusting. That was way too much. Then I'm like, all right, we'll tone it down a little bit. We'll move away from this a little bit and find something a little more in your genre, or your subgenre that works for you better.
I have a hard time now thinking that there was ever that it's now a time where something like Hostel is considered tame.
Right?
Because I remember seeing that when it first came out. I was like, oh my God. And now when I watch it, I'm just like, yeah. The same with like the first Saw. I'm just like, what?
Well,
it's about me though.
Well, I follow you, and I know that you're a fan of Terrifier. And
Yes.
Terrifier has definitely raised the bar above where Evil Dead even had it set.
Yeah.
So, like, Evil Dead 2013 is tame compared to what we've seen in the Terrifier movies.
Yep. And I think that's also the good thing about horror movies. They're always raising the bar. They're always pushing the boundaries. They're always just seeing how far they can go. For the horror genre to evolve, it's got to push boundaries to some degree. Hey, if you're digging this episode, why don't you go ahead and hit like and subscribe? I've got more horror deep dives and episodes of Retro Horror School Talks on the way. And if you want to keep the horror going even past this episode, I'm always posting extra stuff over on Instagram and Threads. Just look for Terrorific Lady. Plus, if you're feeling generous and want to support the show, my Ko-fi link is in the description. All right, back to it. That dang Necronomicon, we're going to just, it's the bane of all of the Evil Dead movies, and apparently it's also going to be the bane of this episode because we talked about it I don't know how many times already, and we're going to talk about it again. Now, I know for horror fans out there, as a little aside, the Necronomicon kind of sort of made an appearance in
Jason Goes to Hell.
Jason Goes to Hell, yes, the final Friday. So it made an appearance in that movie, and it implied that Jason Voorhees is a Deadite. So that's why he keeps like coming like back to life, which is interesting. But besides that movie, do you feel that the Necronomicon could fit into any other horror franchises, horror movies?
I love that you segued that way and you talked about that, because the idea that the Necronomicon was in Friday the 13th, was in Jason Goes to Hell, gave me an idea of something that I have been working on for years. The Necronomicon would be the linchpin to connect every slasher, every horror icon from the 80s and 70s in a way to make a unified horror universe. And it's what I've been working on. We talked, we love dissecting movies. I talked about I love lore and things like that.
Yeah.
So being a fan of these slasher franchises the way that I am, and you can't see it, I have in front of my computer here just Jason masks and all sorts of things here, and then there's a bunch of stuff back there that you can kind of see behind me, all over the place. So the idea for me is that every single horror slasher in some way, shape, or form has been affected at some point by the Necronomicon. If you look at Jason, maybe Pamela Voorhees came across the Necronomicon and found a ritual in there to bring her son back to life, which is not only how Jason came back to life, but then also grew to be the giant deadite zombie in a hockey mask that we all know and love. In Halloween, they say Michael Myers is pure evil. Well, where does that evil come from? Maybe that evil comes from the Necronomicon, because it is not everyone's favorite, but one of my favorite, no, it is my favorite. My favorite Halloween is Curse of Michael Myers, where we get into the Curse of the Thorn and the Celtic rituals and all of the lore behind how Michael was chosen and possessed by a demon. So maybe this Celtic cult had the Necronomicon, used a ritual to summon the Thorn demon, and placed it into Michael, which gave him the powers and abilities that he has. We saw in Nightmare on Elm Street, I think it's Freddy's Dead, where he makes a deal with the dream demons. How does he contact the dream demons to get the powers to become Freddy Krueger in and of itself? Maybe it's the Necronomicon. You mentioned cursed objects, the lament configuration.
Yeah.
In Hellraiser 4, we know that Lamarchand builds the box, but where does he get the blueprints to build the box that opens a gateway to hell? Maybe it's from the Necronomicon. Where does Chucky get the incantations to summon Damballa to transfer his soul? Maybe it's from the Necronomicon. If we ignore the fact that it was in Bride of Chucky and,
right.
Voodoo for...
Yeah, we're going to ignore that.
We're going to ignore that. But it is a really cool idea that this one book could, in a way, explain and connect every slasher in every horror movie and bring them together in one universe, and it be the one thing that connects them all. And it's indestructible.
Yeah. Because they tried to burn it in Evil Dead 2013, and like, it can't be burned, we can't destroy it. It's like, yeah, well, that'd be too easy. If you could burn it, then the movie would be over.
Now, the last one's a little cheesy, but like, Leatherface can't read, so maybe he just saw the face on the cover of the book and said, oh, that's kind of cool, and that's where he got the idea to start wearing other people's faces to cover his own. Little things like that, but the Necronomicon somehow influences, and it's something that it's a passion project that I work on the side every now and then, because even Candyman and how Candyman became Candyman, all of these things are because of the Necronomicon. And I feel like the Necronomicon could work in literally any horror universe and give reason behind pretty much anything and connect all of these characters.
That is such a cool theory and idea. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I was utterly fascinated just listening to all that. Just like, and that would make sense. It would make a hell of a lot of sense.
There's got to be something.
Yeah, it's like, where does all this evil come from if not from somewhere? It's just like, we may not know the backstory behind the evil, but all evil has to have a source of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
So why not the Necronomicon?
I think it's really cool. And like I said, I've been working on connecting everything for a long time and figuring, like, I've studied, like, because Ash vs. Evil Dead went into a lot of the Necronomicon stuff with like the ancient ones and where the Necronomicon was created and where it came from and all of that and how it came about. I watched a lot of that over and over again and like really dissected it and got into that and then kind of figured like, well, what demon would this be for Freddy and what demon would this be for maybe Michael and like so on and so forth. And I have no idea what I'm going to do with this at any point or if anyone will ever see it outside of some of my close friends, but I've typed up a lot of stuff and just started piecing stuff together and trying to make, should I ever make enough money and am able to buy the rights to all of the characters, maybe I can somehow find a way to make one connected slasherverse, which is actually when I originally talked about this on, like, I think it was our third episode of Getting Offed when we officially started doing Getting Offed as a podcast. We talked about it. I think that's what we referred to it as, was the slasherverse, where I initially started talking about all this stuff.
And I think it would also make a really interesting book. Like,
yep.
Not the Necronomicon, but just an interesting book just about like all those connections to how the Necronomicon could connect to all the different horror movies and horror franchises. Totally random because my eyes just kind of happened to dart there. I've got Cotton Candy Cocoon Guy from Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And he's like he's got like a little hook on the end. So he's hanging up on a nail on my wall. He's right there. My eyes just happened to dart to him. It's just like, they got me to thinking, how would the Necronomicon fit into that movie? It's a totally random question. Maybe the killer clown aliens were summoned because someone said something from the Necronomicon.
That, or they're just drawn to the overall presence of the Necronomicon on Earth. Maybe that's why they came to Earth in the first place, was because of the book.
Yeah. See, it's almost like you could connect this to like anything, even the most like ridiculous horror movie on the planet. It's like, why did it happen? Necronomicon.
That's the answer for everything.
That's it. The Necronomicon is the answer for everything. Why am I so tired? Necronomicon. No. Oh, that's great. That's great. I love that. Definitely do something with that, whether you turn it into something like video wise or just even a movie in the future or just like a book. I feel that it has like a lot of value and it's an awesome like theory and awesome like to dissect. You should definitely be doing something with that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm glad you really like that idea because I'm very proud of it. And I know the multiverse theory and universes and everyone's kind of like over it. Marvel did it and DC did it and Universal Monsters did it. And everyone's like, that's enough of that. But like for me, I love seeing all of these characters come together. Like Freddy versus Jason, even though it was what it was, just the idea that these two came together and were in the same place was so cool. And I want to see so much more of that in interactions. And even the final girls in some of these movies getting together to team up to fight off stuff. There's so many possibilities with these movies and the amazing characters and things that we've created and the clashes that could happen and make sense. And that's kind of like a side passion project for me, is trying to make it all make sense and kind of weave in and out of the timelines. Cause like Halloween has 4 different timelines.
Yes, a lot of timelines.
If you count Rob Zombie as its own thing, yeah, definitely. So like trying to make everything make sense and make it work is just something I love doing.
Now, speaking of multiverses and all this multiverse stuff that's going on, I'm a big what if person. I always like to think of, okay, well, what if this happened? Or what if that happened? Or if I put myself in the shoes of this character, like how would I handle this situation? So here is the what if that I want you to note on here. So, what if David had been the final survivor of the film instead of Mia? Because I previously mentioned that the movie set us up to like think that David was the main protagonist and that he was going to end up being the final survivor until it all flipped on its head. But if they kept going on the same track and they made him the final survivor instead of Mia, do you feel that the movie would have had the same impact with him as the final person?
I don't. For a lot of reasons in the movie and outside of the movie. In the movie, a lot of what made Mia such a great survivor was Mia, and I don't think that even though David and Mia are brother and sisters, he had the same ability to survive and come back from everything that she did due to everything that she went through. I don't know if he had killed her and then he was left to fight the Abomination, that he would have survived. Going through everything, I don't know if he would have had it in him to finish it. Also, outside of it, when we talked about how the reason that they changed basically all of the characters and everything and the things of the story was they didn't want comparisons to the original Evil Dead. They didn't want people. If David's the final survivor, everyone's going to be looking at him as the Ash Williams. And as much as I love David, he was no Ash Williams. And I don't think the movie would have been looked at as fondly all of these years later, like we talked about, if everyone was like, oh, well, yeah, David, but David's not Ash. Like, I don't think it would have been received as well or looked back on as fondly if it was David in that position. I think Mia is the reason why we all look back on it and be like, that was actually really cool and it was a really good movie and it was fun.
So you feel with David, as you mentioned, it would have drawn like a lot of unfair comparisons to like Ash Williams. So it's like, oh, he's just like a poor man's Ash. Like, basically. Yeah, that wouldn't have been fair to David because I thought David was a very compelling character. Oh, so yeah, but I'm with you. I feel that it works better with Mia as the final survivor than it does like as with David. Absolutely, 100%. All right, now we are to the portion that I'd like to call my retro lightning round. I've got myself a list of questions that I'm going to ask, and you're going to say the first answer that pops into your head. You can just give a quick answer, or you can expand on that answer as long as you want. Either is perfectly fine with me. So Let me get my list of questions here. Okay, so your first question. Do you think that Mia's survival was pure luck, or do you think something deeper?
Something deeper, absolutely. Yeah. We talked about Mia's entire journey, right? From the loss of her mother and her addiction and all of that. All of that played into who Mia is at the end of the movie, because her entire life she has been fighting. She's been fighting addiction. She's been fighting loss. You know, her brother leaving her to deal with her mother and all of that. Like, all of that built the character that gave us the girl at the end that shoved the bloody stump into the chainsaw that I've said 3 times now and took down the Abomination. Without all of those struggles that she's had to overcome, I don't know that she would have been able to find the strength to finally defeat the Deadite at the end of the movie. So I definitely think it was something much deeper.
All right. Now, say they decided to drop Ash Williams into this version, into Evil Dead 2013. So Ash Williams, for some reason, is here. Surprise. How do you think that he would have handled this version of the Deadites? So the 2013 Deadites.
He would have got his ass kicked. Up, down, all over the place, and somehow luckily stumbled into defeating the Deadite in the end.
So just his survival probably would have been pure luck.
Oh, absolutely. And I keep talking about Ash versus Evil Dead, but when we talk about Evil Dead, you got to talk about everything that we know about the property. You can't just, you can focus on one movie, but there's so much there, especially with these questions. So like we see that in Ash versus the Evil Dead from Stars, where he is this guy who basically the Hefe, the chief, who has this luck, this uncanny ability to, despite his own misgivings, just keep overcoming all of this evil, causing it to keep reoccurring as well, but also just bumbling his way through and being successful in the end out of essentially pure luck.
Ash is the luckiest survivor alive. I wish I could accidentally survive. Now I gotta ask about the Deadites. They seem almost freaking impossible to defeat. Whether it's through another person or, and like you said, in some movies there's other versions of the Necronomicon. So they seem to keep coming back. They seem almost impossible to defeat. Do you think there is any kind of way that we could get rid of these suckers for good, or are we just doomed to experience Deadites forever till the end of time?
The only way, and honestly, I don't even know if that would work, but I feel like the only way to surefire, so they give us ways to defeat the Deadites that we are currently dealing with. The, like we talked about, the issue is the fact that you can't destroy the Necronomicon, and any idiot can read the Latin and resummon the demons and bring them back. So they just keep coming back, right? I feel like the only way to surefire be done with it is to wrap that book up, chain it to a rock, and drop it to the bottom of the ocean so that no one can go get it, no one can retrieve it, and no one can read what's in it. But evil finds a way. So that's not even a guarantee.
Not even if you dropped it in the Marianas Trench, which is like the deepest part of the ocean.
A shark would come and grab it by accident and somehow bring it back up to the surface, and it would wash ashore and someone would find it. No matter what you do, evil finds a way.
Damn you, shark. All right, now I have to ask, what version of the Deadites would you personally rather deal with? Would you want to deal with the Ash Williams style Deadites that you see in Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2? Or would you rather deal with the 2013 Deadites?
Definitely the Ash Williams style Deadites. They are far more comical. Specifically Army of Darkness. Like, I want to fight the Bones in armor.
Oh my
God! That's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. Medieval clash with shit talking bones in armor. That's what I want to fight. But yeah, no, like I'd much rather fight kind of a comical evil that's kind of terrifying, but also seems somewhat beatable for the most part, versus whatever crawled out of the ground at the end of this movie, or David's girlfriend who had the nails in her face and was missing the arm and came out with the nail gun, dragging her foot, and like all of it. Just no, none of that. That is way too much.
Well, she ended up like missing both her arms because her other arm got shot off.
And she was still walking and still going, and that is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah,
the bones catapult them away, they crumble, they fall. Ooh. Yeah, no, easy.
Goodbye. The last question that I want to ask is, you mentioned that you hoped Mia came back in some way, shape, or form. So how would you want to see Mia return in an Evil Dead movie?
We talked about Evil Dead Rise setting up 3 different Necronomicons. So I feel like at some point, once we establish where those Necronomicons are and what they're doing, there has to be an end game, right? We can't just do 2 more movies, say these Necronomicons exist, Beth survives, and then whoever survives, Evil Dead Burn and possibly the next movie, and then just leave them and be. So what I would like to see is, again, joint universe. Maybe we say that Mia's Necronomicon is one of those, right? So we get another one in Evil Dead Burn. The survivor in that, Beth from Evil Dead Rise, and Mia come together to try and find a way to stop the Necronomicons once and for all, to bring them together and find a way to destroy them and fight off whatever Deadites may come about from this.
That would be badass, especially if the final survivor was another woman, and then you have 3 badass women banded together.
And I want that scene where you just see like Mia's boots, and then like the chainsaw blade drops next to him, and we pan up to reveal that it's Mia showing up. That's what I want.
Now I want that to happen, and I definitely hope that it does. We have talked a lot about this awesome movie, Evil Dead 2013, and it's been fun, but as they say, all good things must come to an end. So, once again, Matt, the patron saint of podcasting, thank you so very much for coming on and talking Evil Dead 2013 with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and before I let you go for realsies, I got a couple more things. I'm drawing you back in here. Do you have any last thoughts, I guess final thoughts, on why someone should watch Evil Dead 2013 for the first time, or maybe it's been a while since they've seen it? Why should they watch it again?
I think that this podcast was an absolute perfect reason for anyone who's seen the movie and hasn't revisited it to find all of the reasons why they should go and revisit this movie and check it out. But if you've never seen it, I'm going to suggest to you to do the same thing that I suggest to everyone. Go watch the opening scene until the title scene where it says Evil Dead. And if that hooks you, stick around for the rest of the movie. Let that help you determine whether this movie is for you or not. But at least give it that first 5 to 10 minutes of the movie to see if this is something that you want to watch. And if it is, I promise you will be rewarded by finishing this movie. It is absolutely fantastic.
And now talk about where people can find you and what you do horror-wise on social media, or just where could people find what you do on the worldwide interwebs? And do you have anything coming up that people should keep an eye out for?
Well, like I talked about at the beginning of the show, when you guys hear this episode, our very first interview, where me and Katie interview each other about our love of horror movies and how we got into horror, that will be available for you. You can go check that out. But everything that you need to find is under the Creation World banner. So if you go to youtube.com/Creation World, that is where you can find everything Getting Offed and all of our horror content, the Creation Conversation. So if you are into video games and movies, and as we like to say, all that nerdish, that there as well. And then what started me in my podcasting journey, which is professional wrestling, Smacking It Raw, is available there as well. So if you are a professional wrestling fan, all of that is under one banner, and it is all under the Creation World banner, so you can find all that there. I tried to escape the evil that is X and spread myself out onto other platforms. Unfortunately, those other platforms were not giving me the engagement that I was seeing. So I crawled back over there just to get the engagement for the podcast. So you guys can follow me on X at Getting Offed for your horror content. But if you're not there and you enjoyed this and you want to find more, I'm on Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, all at Smacking It Raw. And that'll get you your wrestling content and your horror content all under one spot. So you guys can follow me there as well.
All right. And I will have the links to everything and where people can find y'all in the description below this video. So to everybody out there watching, thank you so much for watching this episode of Virtual Horror School Talks. Please like, subscribe, and share with fellow horror fans. And definitely subscribe if you want to keep learning more about horror and your favorite horror movies. Class is dismissed, everybody. And I will see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.